What drives a mother, the very person entrusted with protecting and nurturing life, to commit the unthinkable against her own children? And how does a seemingly ordinary day in a peaceful suburban home spiral into a scene of unimaginable tragedy? These are the haunting questions that bring us here today, a story so shocking, so deeply unsettling, that it forces us to confront the fragile boundaries between love, mental health, and devastation. In the heart of Duxbury, Massachusetts, a pleasant neighborhood where children play on manicured lawns and families gather around dinner tables, an event unfolded that would send shockwaves through the nation. It wasn't a break-in or a crime perpetrated by an outsider. No, this was something far more chilling. This act came from within, a darkness lurking behind the walls of what many would call the perfect home. The story we're about to tell isn't just another tragic headline. It's a narrative that pulls back a curtain on the silent struggles of motherhood, the weight of societal expectations, and the devastating consequences of a broken mental health system. At the center of it all lies a mother who sent her husband away on a simple errand. This case is more than just a tragedy, it's a puzzle. How could such a catastrophic event occur in a place filled with laughter, family photos, and bedtime stories? What led to that fateful moment when innocence was replaced with heartbreak? And why did no one see the storm brewing until it was too late? As we delve into this harrowing tale, we won't just recount the events that transpired. Instead, we'll journey into the complex world of postpartum mental health, the hidden battles that many mothers face, and the questions that still linger long after the crime has been committed. Prepare yourself for a story that will challenge your understanding of human nature and leave you questioning how something so horrific could happen in a place meant to embody love and safety. The answers lie ahead, but they are anything but simple. This isn't just a story. It's a cautionary tale, a call for awareness, and an exploration of how tragedy can unfold in the most unexpected places. Stay with us as we piece together the events of that fateful day and the chilling decisions that forever changed one family and a community. From every outward glance, Lindsay Clancy's life appeared flawless, the kind of life that many would envy. Family photos painted the portrait of a woman who was deeply in love with her husband and cherished her 3 children. Smiles that seemed to reach her eyes, laughter frozen in time, and candid moments captured in the way only a family filled with love can create. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues spoke of Lindsay as a beacon of compassion, a nurse dedicated to helping others, a mother who adored her children, and a wife who deeply loved her husband. Her world, at least to those looking in, appeared like the epitome of happiness. But appearances can be deceiving. While those around her marveled at the seemingly perfect picture, Lindsay was quietly fighting a battle that no one could see. It wasn't physical, and it wasn't visible in the photos or the stories told by her friends. It was internal, relentless, and consuming. Postpartum depression is a challenge faced by countless mothers, a cruel contradiction to the joy society expects from new motherhood. But Lindsay's struggles went beyond the heavy weight of sadness and anxiety that accompany postpartum depression. For her, there were signs of something much darker and far more insidious: postpartum psychosis. Unlike postpartum depression, which can feel like a suffocating fog, postpartum psychosis is a storm. It twists reality and distorts the mind, creating a dangerous landscape where thoughts can become catastrophically detached from reality. Many mothers who experience postpartum psychosis describe moments of overwhelming confusion, hallucinations, and intrusive thoughts. It's a condition that demands urgent attention and care because, without it, the consequences can be devastating. For Lindsay, the symptoms didn't surface overnight. They crept in slowly, masked by her dedication to her family and the responsibilities of motherhood. There were subtle signs, perhaps moments when she seemed unusually withdrawn or exhausted, maybe fleeting comments that hinted at her inner turmoil but were easily dismissed as the normal stresses of raising 3 children. The truth is, it's easy to miss the warning signs when you don't know what to look for. And in Lindsay's case, the mask of normalcy she wore was convincing. Her husband, Patrick, was her steadfast partner. He worked tirelessly to provide for their family and to support Lindsay in every way he could. Friends recall him as attentive and caring, always looking for ways to lighten her load. But even the closest partners can struggle to fully grasp the depths of mental health challenges. Patrick may have noticed that something was off, but did he understand the severity? Could anyone have predicted what was to come? Lindsay's days became a careful balancing act. To outsiders, she seemed to juggle the demands of motherhood and her career with grace, but the cracks in her foundation were beginning to show. As her mental state deteriorated, the line between reality and intrusive thoughts blurred, leaving her increasingly isolated in her struggle. What makes Lindsay's story so chilling is how ordinary it all seemed at first. Just another family navigating the ups and downs of life, just another mother trying to do her best. But the reality of her mental health challenges was building to a breaking point, one that no one saw coming. And then came the day that would forever change everything. A day that started as any other, but ended in unspeakable tragedy. What pushed Lindsay past the edge? Was it a moment of impulsivity, or had the storm been quietly brewing for weeks, months, or longer? As we move deeper into this story, we'll explore the events leading up to that fateful day and try to uncover what could drive a loving mother to commit such an unthinkable act. Stay with us as we continue to unravel this haunting case, because the answers lie just ahead, and they are far from simple. As we continue to unravel Lindsay's story, the question that looms in the air becomes harder to ignore. What went wrong? What caused a mother who once appeared so loving, so devoted, to descend into such a dark place? Was there a single moment that broke her? Or had the pressure and turmoil been quietly building for months, like a simmering storm, only waiting for the right moment to unleash itself? The answers may be scattered in the fragments of Lindsay's life, in the small shifts that only someone truly paying attention could have spotted. In the weeks leading up to that fateful day, Lindsay's behavior began to change, subtly at first, but then with an increasing intensity that her family couldn't ignore. She was prescribed a variety of medications to address her mental health, including benzodiazepines to calm her anxiety and antidepressants to help lift the weight of her depression. But, as anyone who struggled with mental illness knows, medication can sometimes take time to work, and for Lindsay, the effect seemed to be fleeting. Sleep was elusive, the nights were long, filled with anxiety and restlessness. The thoughts in her mind became harder to escape, like a constant barrage of guilt, fear, and hopelessness. Her social media posts, once full of family moments and positive affirmations, began to take on a darker tone. One post might speak of the exhaustion she felt as a mother, another of the overwhelming pressure she was under. But then there were the more cryptic ones, those that hinted at a desperation only those closest to her might recognize. "Some days, I wonder if I'm doing more harm than good," she once wrote. It was a statement that in hindsight seemed to echo the kind of despair that often precedes tragedy, but at the time it was brushed off as another moment of frustration. After all, wasn't every mother entitled to have her bad days? Behind closed doors, Lindsay's husband Patrick tried everything he could to help her. He took time off work, caring for their 3 young children and ensuring Lindsay had the support she needed. It wasn't enough, though. Patrick's love and devotion, while comforting, weren't enough to stem the tide of Lindsay's inner turmoil. He couldn't be there every moment, and as the days went by, it became increasingly clear that Lindsay was slipping further into a place of darkness. Still, Patrick did what he could. He watched her carefully, staying close, attempting to comfort her with words of reassurance. He noticed her exhaustion, both physical and emotional, and tried to lift her spirits. But even with his constant support, Lindsay's internal world was crumbling, the cracks becoming more pronounced. To make matters worse, Lindsay felt completely isolated in her struggle. No one, not even Patrick, could fully understand what she was experiencing. Her friends and family could see that something wasn't right, but few had the ability to see the gravity of her mental health issues. How could they? From the outside, Lindsay was the picture of a devoted mother and wife, doing everything she could to keep her family together. But inside, she was falling apart, and the weight of that pain was becoming unbearable. The isolation she felt grew as her mental state deteriorated. It wasn't just the exhaustion or the constant anxiety. There was a deep, gnawing sense of guilt that haunted her. The guilt of being unable to meet the expectations of motherhood, of feeling like a failure when all she wanted to do was be the best for her children. She would later admit in fragmented thoughts that she didn't feel capable of being the mother they deserved, and perhaps the most chilling thought of all, one that she would never share, was the fear that her children might be better off without her. And so, the storm continued to build. Days blended into nights, and the strain on Lindsay grew heavier. The medication she was prescribed did little to ease her struggles, and the support she received, though well-intentioned, was not enough to break the spiraling cycle of her thoughts. There were moments of clarity, but they were fleeting, and the darkness would quickly reclaim her mind. On the surface, life continued. The house was filled with the noise of children's laughter, the constant rhythm of daily life that kept everyone occupied. But beneath the surface, Lindsay's mind was unraveling. And as the days passed, the question loomed: when would the breaking point arrive? Would it be that day? Or had it already come long before? As the tension mounted, one thing became clear. Lindsay was running out of time. The fragile thread that connected her to her family was stretched to its limit, and soon something would have to give. What would she do when faced with the weight of it all? The answer, as we know now, was both shocking and heartbreaking, a reality no one could have predicted. The day that changed everything was January 24, 2023. It began like any other in the Clancy household, a quiet morning, the hum of routine filling the home. Patrick, as he always did, went about his day, managing the tasks at hand and preparing for what was supposed to be a typical evening. His errand list was simple: pick up dinner for the family, maybe grab a few things from the store, and return to the warmth of his home. But what he couldn't have known, what he never would have imagined, was that the very moment he walked out the door, Lindsay was putting her plan into motion. The house was eerily still in his absence, as if it too sensed that the calm was only a facade. Lindsay, left alone with her 3 young children, Cora, 5 years old, Dawson, 3, and baby Callan, just 8 months old, found herself standing at the precipice of a decision. She had orchestrated the scene meticulously, ensuring that Patrick's departure was timed to perfection, a fleeting window of time that would change the lives of everyone involved. This wasn't a spontaneous act born from a sudden rage. No, this had been brewing for some time, a tragic culmination of months of mounting emotional and psychological pain that Lindsay had kept hidden from the world. Reports later confirmed what seemed unimaginable. Lindsay took her children's lives one by one in a horrifying sequence of violence. First, little Cora, the energetic, lively little girl who was always the light of the room. She, like her siblings, never stood a chance against the dark force that had overtaken Lindsay's mind. Next was Dawson, her curious and playful son, only 3 years old. Finally, baby Callan, who at just 8 months old, had his whole life ahead of him. In the most gut-wrenching of details, it was reported that as Callan clung to life, Lindsay, overcome by despair and whatever was left of her deteriorating mind, tried to end her own life as well. The moments before Patrick's return were filled with an unimaginable stillness, a silence that hung heavily in the air. He had no idea that, as he made his way back to the house, Lindsay's world had already spiraled beyond repair. What he walked into when he returned would forever haunt him and change his life in ways no one could have. When Patrick arrived home, he found the house unusually quiet, the door slightly ajar as though something was off. The dishes in the sink hadn't been put away, the children's toys scattered on the floor, but there was no sign of the chaos that had unfolded just hours earlier. He called out for Lindsay, but the response he received was not what he expected. Inside, he found Lindsay unconscious, her attempt to take her own life barely averted. But more chilling was the discovery that awaited him: the lifeless bodies of his children, each one showing signs of the unspeakable act that had been carried out in his absence. Paramedics and law enforcement arrived quickly, their attempts to revive the children proving futile. In a cruel twist of fate, despite the heroic efforts of medical professionals, Cora, Dawson, and Callan were pronounced dead at the scene. Lindsay, meanwhile, was rushed to the hospital where her condition remained critical. It was clear now that the woman who had once been the center of her children's lives, the mother who had shown nothing but love and care, had fallen into a state so far removed from reality that the horrors she had just inflicted seemed beyond belief. Patrick, now a shell of the man he once was left to grapple with the fallout of a day he would never forget. How could this happen? What could have caused his loving wife to commit such an unimaginable act? In the days that followed, as Lindsay recovered from her injuries, the investigation began in earnest. As authorities delved deeper into Lindsay's history, her mental health struggles became even more apparent. The strain of motherhood, the pressure of her unresolved depression, and the inability to escape the suffocating grip of her thoughts had ultimately led her down this dark and tragic path. But the questions remained. Why didn't anyone see this coming? Why had Lindsay, despite all the love and support around her, been unable to break free from her downward spiral? And perhaps most painfully, how could a mother do this to her own children, the very ones she had once fought so hard to protect? The events of that day would forever reverberate through the Clancy family, and the answers to these questions were still far from clear. But what was evident, as we begin to unravel Lindsay's story further, is that the tragic consequences of that one day were only the beginning of the nightmare Patrick and the rest of the world would have to live with. The scene that unfolded when Patrick returned home was one of incomprehensible horror. As he stood frozen at the doorway, he couldn't process the chaos before him, the chaos he was powerless to stop. His eyes searched for his children, the ones who had been the center of his world, the ones who filled their home with joy and laughter, but what he found instead was an overwhelming silence. The air, once filled with the sounds of their playful chatter, was now suffocating, thick with dread. His first instinct was to call out for Lindsay, but as he stepped further into the house, he was struck by the eerie stillness that greeted him. The absence of the children's laughter, the absence of their small, constant noises. It was all wrong. When he found Lindsay, unconscious but alive, he quickly realized that this was far worse than he could have ever imagined. His wife, the woman he loved and had stood by through thick and thin, was sprawled on the floor, battered, her body in a state of near collapse. But it was the sight of his children, Cora, Dawson, and Callan, that would haunt him for the rest of his life. With a heart racing in panic, Patrick immediately dialed 911. His voice shaking as he tried to explain the unspeakable horrors that had taken place in his own home. "My wife! My kids! Please help me!" His words were barely coherent as he tried to grasp the situation. Paramedics arrived on the scene within minutes, their hands moving quickly and expertly, but the damage had already been done. Cora, just 5 years old, had already slipped away. Her bright eyes, once full of curiosity and wonder, were now vacant, her tiny body still, as if the life had been drained from her in the blink of an eye. Next was Dawson, just 3 years old, whose innocent smile had been extinguished far too soon. Despite the paramedics' best efforts to revive them, the children were beyond saving. The world, at that moment, seemed to come crashing down on Patrick, his heart shattering with every failed attempt to bring them back. And then there was Callan, the baby, only 8 months old. His fragile body, still so new to the world, had endured more pain than anyone should ever know. Callan was rushed to the hospital, clinging to life, but it was clear that the damage was too severe. The doctors did everything they could, but it wasn't enough. A few days later, Callan too was lost, his short life snuffed out before it had even truly begun. In a single, heart-wrenching moment, the Clancy home, once filled with the sounds of children's laughter, the joyous chaos of family life, had been transformed into a scene of unspeakable sorrow. Patrick, reeling from the shock, was left to confront a new reality, one that he had never prepared for, one that no amount of love or preparation could have shielded him from. His wife, whom he had tried to protect, whom he had stood by through her mental health struggles, had become the agent of this unfathomable loss. And now, all he was left with were the haunting images of his children's lifeless bodies and the woman he thought he knew, lying motionless in a hospital bed. As Lindsay lay unconscious, her injuries serious but not life-threatening, the community was left in a state of disbelief. Friends, neighbors, and loved ones struggled to comprehend what had happened behind closed doors. How could the woman they had all known, the one who was a nurse, a devoted mother, and a caring friend, be responsible for such a horrific act? What had pushed her to the breaking point, and why did no one see the warning signs? The aftermath of that day was felt far beyond the Clancy home. The pain of the loss of 3 young lives sent shockwaves through the entire community, and the question everyone asked was the same: how could this have happened? As Patrick faced the unspeakable truth that his children were gone and his wife was the one responsible, he was left to pick up the pieces of his broken life. In the days following the tragedy, the investigation into Lindsay's mental health began in earnest. Authorities sought to understand what had driven Lindsay to take such drastic and unimaginable actions. Her history of postpartum depression and mental health struggles were now at the forefront of the inquiry. But even as details began to emerge, the story remained a chilling mystery. Was Lindsay's condition simply the result of untreated depression, or was there something deeper at play? What was it that led her to this point? These questions lingered in the air as the world tried to make sense of the unfathomable. But amidst the confusion, one thing was clear: this tragedy had shattered the lives of everyone involved. The Clancy family, once a picture of suburban happiness, would never be the same. Patrick was left to mourn the loss of his children and to try to understand how the woman he loved could commit such an unspeakable act. And as Lindsay's future remained uncertain, the world was left to grapple with the chilling reality of what had happened behind closed doors. As the trial progressed, one striking detail stood out. Lindsay Clancy had not appeared in court at her last hearing in December. She had waived her right to appear before the judge, a move that raised many questions among the public and legal experts alike. The decision left many to wonder about her physical and mental state. What did it mean that she, the central figure in the case, was not present to hear the final stages of the proceedings? Reports confirmed that Lindsay was last known to be at Duxbury Hospital, where she was undergoing court-ordered mental treatment. Her attorney, Kevin Reddington, stated that Lindsay was still in a wheelchair, a sign of her ongoing physical and psychological struggles. The image of Lindsay, once a vibrant and active mother, now reduced to a wheelchair-bound figure, seemed to underscore the gravity of her condition and the toll that this tragedy had taken on her. Yet, as the trial continued without her physical presence in the courtroom, the questions surrounding her mental state only deepened. Was Lindsay truly incapable of attending the trial due to her mental health, or was her absence a calculated decision? Her attorneys argued that her condition was still fragile, and the trauma of the events, combined with her ongoing treatment, meant that appearing in court would have been too overwhelming for her. However, this absence also meant that Patrick, the surviving family member who had already lost so much, would be left to navigate the courtroom drama alone, forced to confront the woman who had once been his partner but now seemed a distant, unrecognizable figure. Her absence from the courtroom added another layer of complexity to the already tangled emotions surrounding the case. Some questioned whether Lindsay's decision to waive her right to appear was an attempt to avoid facing the consequences of her actions, while others wondered if it was a sign of her genuine mental distress. The public reaction was mixed. Some expressed sympathy, viewing her absence as a sign that Lindsay was still suffering deeply from the psychological effects of postpartum psychosis, while others saw it as a refusal to take responsibility for the horrors she had inflicted on her children. In any case, her absence cast a shadow over the proceedings, further intensifying the uncertainty that surrounded the entire case. As the jury deliberated and the nation watched, Lindsay Clancy's future remained uncertain. Would the mental health issues she faced be seen as a mitigating factor, or would her failure to appear in court be viewed as another indication of a mind already beyond repair? And would Patrick, who had lost everything, find any semblance of closure as the trial reached its conclusion? With each passing day, the mystery of Lindsay's motives deepened. Whether in the courtroom or confined to a hospital bed, the world was still left wondering, was this a tragedy born out of untreated mental illness, or was it something more, chilling altogether? As the trial moved forward, the answers seemed just out of reach, like fragments of a shattered puzzle, waiting to be pieced together, but still beyond comprehension. In the wake of the tragedy, mental health experts began weighing in, drawing attention to the complex nature of postpartum depression and the even rarer condition of postpartum psychosis. Many experts emphasized that while Lindsay's case was tragic, it was not isolated. Postpartum depression affects millions of women every year, and postpartum psychosis, though far less common, is equally dangerous if left untreated. Some argued that better screening and more comprehensive support systems for new mothers might have made a difference in Lindsay's case, perhaps preventing the horror that unfolded in that seemingly ordinary home. At the same time, the stigma surrounding mental health, particularly in the context of motherhood, became a major point of discussion. For years, society had often overlooked or minimized the struggles of new mothers, viewing them as signs of weakness or failure. In Lindsay's case, her apparent inability to seek or receive proper help had tragic consequences. Advocates for mental health reform began pushing for a greater focus on the mental well-being of mothers, arguing that society must change the narrative, offering empathy, understanding, and proper care instead of judgment. Amid the growing conversation about mental health, new developments in Lindsay's case emerged. It was reported that Lindsay had been ordered to undergo a psychological evaluation by experts appointed by the prosecution. This move was seen as critical in understanding whether Lindsay's mental state at the time of the crime could indeed be classified as the result of postpartum psychosis, or whether other, deeper factors were at play. The psychological evaluation would become a pivotal piece of evidence as the prosecution and defense continued to present their arguments. Was Lindsay a victim of her mental illness, or was her behavior indicative of something far darker? As the nation continued to process the tragedy, public opinion remained divided. Some were sympathetic, willing to view Lindsay's actions through the lens of mental illness, while others, particularly those who had been impacted by similar tragedies, could not forgive the actions that took place that fateful January day. The Clancy family, once the picture of suburban happiness, had been irrevocably shattered. Patrick, who had suffered an unimaginable loss, found himself at the center of a storm, his grief compounded by the knowledge that his wife had been the one to cause the destruction of their family. Despite the ongoing legal proceedings, many were left wondering if true justice could ever be achieved in a case so deeply entangled with mental illness. Was it enough to hold Lindsay accountable for her actions, or did the focus need to be on reforming a broken mental health system? The tragedy had revealed flaws that many had long known about but had been too afraid to address. Flaws in how we treat mental health, how we care for mothers, and how society responds to those who suffer in silence. Now, as the world continues to follow Lindsay's case, there is a call for change. Advocates are pushing for more resources and support for new mothers, more education about postpartum depression, and most crucially, the removal of the stigma that surrounds mental health challenges. It's a conversation that has been long overdue, one that is now, more than ever, impossible to ignore. And as we reach the end of this harrowing journey, we ask you, do you believe that more should be done to support mothers struggling with mental health issues, or do you think there are deeper issues at play in cases like this one? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe that mental health needs to be taken seriously and that more support for mothers is essential, subscribe to the channel. Only those who believe mental health should be addressed properly will support this important cause. Let's continue this conversation, because the real work is just beginning.